I was talking to a logistics manager for a major European automaker recently, a man who spent 30 years obsessed with the just-in-time miracle. He showed me an old map in his office, a spider web of thin blue lines connecting factories in Shanghai, ports in Rotterdam, and assembly lines in Bavaria. He spoke about that map with a kind of nostalgic reverence, describing a world where a $1.02 difference in the price of a screw was enough to shift a contract 6,000 miles away. He told me with total conviction that this was the ultimate insurance policy for peace.
Right, the classic assumption.
Who would ever start a war, he asked, when it would mean blowing up your own supply chain? His face was lit with the satisfaction of a man who believed the cold, rational logic of the spreadsheet had finally conquered the messy impulses of history. But then the conversation shifted. I asked him about his work over the last 18 months, and his entire demeanor changed.
I can imagine.
The calm, detached professional disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like he was bracing for an impact. He pulled up a new map on his tablet. This one was covered in jagged red zones and restricted labels. He wasn't talking about efficiency anymore. He was talking about fortresses. He told me he spent the last year dismantling the very networks he spent his career building.
A complete reversal.
He's moving production to trusted allies, even if it adds millions to the bottom line. He's stockpiling semiconductors like they're gold bars and viewing energy routes not as trade lanes, but as potential choke points. He dropped a line that stayed with me. We spent decades thinking we were building a global village. It turns out we were just building a more efficient way for our rivals to hold us hostage.
That is a stark realization.
That sudden, jarring pivot from the dream of an interconnected utopia to the paranoid reality of strategic resilience isn't just a corporate trend. It is the sound of the old world breaking. The idea that trade would prevent conflict has collapsed, and in its place, the global economy is being redesigned as a weapon. We are no longer living in an era defined by the lowest bidder. We are living in the return of geopolitics, where your supply chain is the new front line. It makes you wonder, if the economic ties that were supposed to keep the peace are being cut one by one, what is left to stop the next great collision?
Well, the premise of that collision, it requires immediate structural analysis. You are observing a fundamental reorganization of international power. I mean, the era of unquestioned apolitical globalization is definitively over.
Right, and this collapse of the old paradigm forces an immediate reevaluation of the physical spaces where global trade actually materializes. You really have to consider the immediate sensory reality of a logistics coordinator named Sao.
Yes, Thao's location is critical here.
He works at a bustling dry port situated directly on the border of Laos and China. If you were to stand in the village surrounding this port a decade ago, you would observe a quiet, marginalized transit point. Goods simply pass through this geographic space on their way to wealthier consumer markets.
Leaving nothing behind.
Exactly. The physical footprint of global trade left nothing behind for the local population but the dust of passing trucks. The economic model was fundamentally extractive. It bypassed the structural development of the local region entirely.
And that historical model represented the exact vulnerability of the previous global order. Developing regions were relegated to passive conduits. They possessed zero economic agency within the broader supply chain.
But today, under a new framework of regional connectivity, the physical and economic reality of that space has been entirely overwritten. Thao no longer watches trucks pass by. He now oversees a highly sophisticated cold chain facility.
Which is a massive infrastructural leap.
It's not merely a refrigerated storage unit. It is a vital, active node that integrates local agricultural production directly into a massive multipolar economic network. And the defining sensory marker of this transformation is the arrival of the first high-speed freight train.
That sound changes everything.
When you hear that train arrive, you are not merely listening to cargo transit. You are listening to the definitive transition of Laos from a vulnerable, landlocked nation into a structurally empowered, land-linked logistics hub.
The distinction between landlocked and land-linked is not semantic. It is a profound strategic shift in economic policy. It dictates that this specific region is no longer a passive bystander, subject to the whims of distant market monopolies.
It becomes an active participant.
It is now a vital, active organ within a resilient supply chain that prioritizes regional stability over distant profit margins. The concept of resilience is frequently reduced to abstract risk mitigation in corporate boardrooms. Here, it manifests as a deeply human experience of gaining direct economic agency.
Well, let me push back on this concept of the old world order just for a moment. For decades following the Cold War, the international order was entirely predicated on a singular assumption that economic interdependence would categorically prevent war.
That was the prevailing theory, yes.
The logic dictated that as multinational corporations constructed production networks across borders, the cost of conflict would become prohibitively high. Are you stating that economic forces have, definitively failed to permanently supersede international politics?
Yes. The global economy is no longer operating as a neutral mechanism that moderates geopolitical conflict. Instead, it has been aggressively repurposed as a primary instrument of political competition. Tariffs, technology restrictions, sanctions, and investment controls are no longer peripheral economic adjustments.
They are the main event.
They are the central defining instruments of modern foreign strategy.
So the core criteria for international economic policy have shifted dramatically, because in the preceding decades, efficiency and cost reduction were the absolute driving metrics.
Today, those metrics have been aggressively replaced by the imperatives of strategic control and political resilience. States are utilizing trade, technological development, energy infrastructure, and financial systems to exert direct pressure on one another.
But you mentioned this actually empowers developing nations.
Yes, this macroeconomic weaponization fundamentally alters the trajectory of global development, but specifically, it accelerates the empowerment of developing nations.
I really need you to explain the mechanics of that empowerment. How does the weaponization of trade by larger powers empower a developing nation like Laos?
Well, you must examine the constraints of the traditional global political economy. The previous landscape constrained developing countries through technological and financial monopolies. These monopolies were dominated by a limited number of Western-based corporations and institutions.
Right, so they dictated the terms.
Exactly. Developing countries were subjected to immense structural pressures, limiting their development options to raw resource extraction and low-tier manufacturing. The current multipolar shift, driven by expanded infrastructure and production networks, completely disrupts that monopoly.
So they have new avenues for growth.
Yes. Developing nations across Asia and Africa now possess direct access to affordable infrastructure, comprehensive production chains, and advanced technological cooperation.
Which allows them to establish their own domestic industrial capacities. They're creating independent economic ecosystems rather than relying on a single hegemonic economic center.
And this transformation carries profound political implications for national development processes. It allows these nations to assert policy autonomy and engage in long-term strategic planning without the looming threat of structural economic coercion. They are no longer structurally trapped at the bottom of the value chain.
This shift toward industrial and strategic autonomy is visibly altering the economic architecture of emerging markets. You can observe the current operational reality of an engineer named Eris, who is situated in a specialized industrial park in Indonesia.
Right, the nickel processing facility.
Exactly. Eris works at a state-of-the-art high-tech nickel refinery on the island. Crucially, this facility does not process nickels to be exported as raw ore to distant manufacturing hubs. Instead, it processes the nickel specifically for the domestic production of electric vehicle batteries.
Directly within Indonesia.
Directly on the island, yes. This represents a profound generational and structural contrast. Eris's father spent his entire working life digging earth to be shipped away, only to have the finished goods sold back to his country at an exponential markup.
The classic resource colony dynamic.
Right. Eris, conversely, is operating within a new paradigm. He processes this material through a joint venture that explicitly shares technical intellectual property. This allows the country to build a comprehensive domestic technological ecosystem.
This transition from a historically exploited resource colony to an equal technological partner is driven by the urgent need for strategic autonomy. It is a protective, highly calculated measure.
To avoid getting caught in the crossfire.
Exactly. By securing their own critical assets, nations ensure they do not become collateral damage in the escalating trade wars between larger powers.
Let me offer an analogy to clarify this shift for you. The old global supply chain was managed exactly like a massive corporate spreadsheet. It was designed exclusively to maximize profit margins by minimizing labor and production costs completely, regardless of the geographic fragility it created.
A highly brittle system.
Incredibly brittle. The new global framework treats supply chains like sovereign borders. The international competition is no longer merely a corporate battle over market share. It is a geopolitical contest over critical physical assets.
Yes, the physical materials are paramount.
Semiconductors, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and the localized capacity to process them have become the new territorial markers of sovereign security.
To understand the mechanics of this new sovereign security, you really must deconstruct the dominant political rhetoric surrounding global supply chains. You frequently encounter the terminology of de-risking, friendshoring, and reshoring.
If politicians in the West are aggressively pushing friendshoring and de-risking, isn't there at least some political reality forcing these companies to move? Are you suggesting this terminology is entirely fabricated?
These terms are fundamentally political maneuvers, entirely divorced from objective economic reality. They are driven by an aggressive Cold War mentality. They are frequently deployed to deflect public attention away from domestic policy failures.
So it's a rhetorical distraction.
By hyping claims of overdependence, these political actors attempt to justify the politicization of trade and investment. The underlying objective of this rhetoric is clear: to curb the manufacturing upgrades and technological advancement of emerging economies.
This political maneuvering must be strictly contrasted with the actual economic reality of the China Plus One strategy. The narrative dictates that this strategy is a tool for mitigating risk or decoupling from Chinese markets.
That narrative is objectively false. It is merely a natural, inevitable outcome of market forces and supply chain diversification. Companies expanding production beyond China while maintaining their core operations within China are responding to basic economic rationale.
Like rising domestic labor costs.
They are adjusting to rising domestic labor costs, while Chinese enterprises themselves are simultaneously diversifying their investment and market destinations. The reality, determined by immutable economic laws and proven by sustained business decisions, is that China remains entirely irreplaceable in the global supply chain.
You cannot simply state irreplaceability without breaking down the structural mechanics. I really need you to unpack exactly why this is an economic reality.
This irreplaceability is anchored by 5 undeniable structural pillars. You must examine each one to understand the architecture of modern trade. First, China is the world's largest manufacturing economy.
Of massive scale.
Yes, it possesses the most comprehensive and complete industrial system on the planet. For over 15 consecutive years, it has led global manufacturing output. More than 40% of its major industrial products rank first globally in production volume.
Which means, if a multinational corporation attempts to completely relocate a complex manufacturing process, they do not just lose a factory, they lose the entire localized ecosystem of secondary and tertiary suppliers that physically exist within a 10-mile radius of that factory.
The sheer density of the industrial system cannot be replicated through political decrees. Second, the nation operates as the second largest consumer market in the world.
It's not just about export anymore.
With a massive middle-income group, domestic demand has structurally shifted from quantity to quality. This acts as the primary stabilizing force in global consumption.
So the market is no longer just absorbing cheap, mass-produced goods. It is driving the demand for high-end, technologically advanced products, which forces global corporations to maintain their presence to access that tier of consumption.
Third, it has transitioned from the world's factory to a major leading innovation hub. It ranks among the absolute global leaders in innovation clusters and patent filings, with massive research and development investment worldwide.
This directly counters the outdated narrative of mere assembly. The intellectual property and the primary research are originating directly from within this hub.
Fourth, it is a human capital powerhouse. The economy is no longer powered merely by a demographic dividend, the sheer volume of available workers. It is now powered by a massive talent dividend.
Meaning highly educated workers.
Yes. The workforce is infused annually with over 10 million new university graduates.
You are talking about 10 million highly specialized engineers, developers, and researchers entering the supply chain ecosystem every single year. The scale of that talent acquisition is structurally unmatched.
Finally, the 5th pillar: an internationally aligned, transparent, and predictable business environment. Through continuous institutional opening up and strict alignment with international high standards, this environment continues to attract massive volumes of global capital and specialized talent.
Which completely immunizes the core supply chain against politically motivated de-risking strategies. capital fundamentally flows towards stability and predictable returns, which this environment guarantees.
Absolutely.
While the dominant geopolitical narrative focuses heavily on technological containment and the weaponization of the tech industry, specifically the siloing of semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and advanced batteries, there is a massive parallel movement actively building an open-world economy right in these geopolitical fault lines.
It's happening at the grassroots level.
Yes, you can observe this reality through the working relationship between a software developer named Chen, based in Shenzhen, and his collaborator, Omar, located in Cairo. Despite the intensifying barriers being erected by the tech Cold War, Chen and Omar are actively collaborating on an open-source green energy initiative.
They're engineering localized smart grid solutions. Crucially, these solutions are designed specifically to bypass the proprietary black boxes mandated by single superpowers.
Let me use an analogy to make this mechanism perfectly clear for you. Imagine a global power grid where one dominant country forces everyone else to use their highly specific, patented plug shape. If you cannot afford their plug, or if they decide to sanction you, your entire grid goes dark.
A total dependency.
Exactly. Chen and Omar are essentially engineering a universal adapter that anyone in the world can print and utilize for free. The philosophical reality of their work is profound.
They are utilizing technology as a shared ladder to build a common utility. They act as a bridge in an increasingly fragmented world.
This directly counters the cynical view of global trade as an exclusively zero-sum arena. The ground-level reality of this collaboration reveals a structural rejection of the winner-takes-all landscape. In an environment where technology is increasingly used to construct insurmountable walls, engineering open utilities represents the most vital form of global innovation today.
And this grassroots collaboration is not an isolated phenomenon. It is actively supported and scaled by highly structured institutional frameworks. The absolute institutional embodiment of this open-source collaboration is the China International Supply Chain Expo, or CICE.
I need you to define the mechanics of this expo. What separates the CISCE from a standard, commercially driven trade show?
The CISCE is explicitly mandated as a global public good. Its primary stated objective is the construction of a depoliticized circle of friends within the international business community. This stands in direct structural opposition to politically motivated exclusionary decoupling clubs.
And the scale reflects this.
Yes. The scale and inclusivity demonstrate the sheer momentum of this open architecture. The event features over 650 major exhibitors representing more than 70 different countries and regions. It operates in strict adherence to World Trade Organization rules and respects fundamental market dynamics.
If the objective is a depoliticized circle of friends, how does this institution physically integrate emerging markets that might otherwise be locked out of the global supply chain?
The institutional design of the CISCE prioritizes the structural integration of emerging markets through direct material support. Consider the reality for an exhibitor from a least developed country, such as Rwanda or Mozambique.
The financial barriers are usually too high.
Right. At a traditional exclusionary Western trade show, the financial barrier to entry alone would isolate them. The CISCE allocates free exhibition booths and comprehensive logistical support specifically to ensure these nations are integrated into the global economic fabric.
So the operative mandate of the expo is connecting, never decoupling. It provides an end-to-end professional platform where enterprises of all sizes can discover partners, identify supply chain opportunities, and unlock technological solutions across the entire value chain.
By focusing on shared needs and mutual benefits rather than political alignment, the CICE engineers a resilient, efficient, and vibrant global supply chain designed to support shared prosperity.
This transition from physical supply chains and technological infrastructure directly exposes the underlying philosophies driving international relations. The physical mechanics of trade and technology are entirely insufficient if the underlying civilizational outlook driving state behavior remains anchored in conflict.
That is the core issue.
The unprecedented fragility of the current global order requires us to examine this underlying philosophy. The international system is currently fracturing under the weight of kinetic military conflicts raging in Europe and the Middle East, functioning alongside invisible tariff wars.
The fragility is immense.
To comprehend the mechanisms required to stabilize this fracturing architecture, you must consider a foundational concept permanently inscribed at the UNESCO headquarters. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed.
This maxim clarifies that geopolitical clashes, economic confrontations, and the weaponization of supply chains do not emerge from a vacuum. They stem directly from specific cultural cognitions and zero-sum worldviews.
Break down the mechanics of these competing worldviews. How exactly does traditional Western international relations theory operate?
Traditional Western international relations theory is fundamentally defined by a zero-sum logic. As articulated by scholars such as Martin White, this Western paradigm posits that international politics operates within an entirely anarchic society.
Meaning there is no overarching authority to keep the peace.
Correct. Because it addresses a system devoid of supreme authority, Western political science views international relations not as a space for mutual advancement, but merely as a theory of survival.
So you are stating that the Western paradigm fundamentally rejects the idea of a shared, better future, and instead views global relations purely as a constant chaotic fight for survival governed absolutely by the law of the jungle.
In this paradigm, one nation's gain is inherently and inextricably linked to another nation's loss. This cognitive framework makes structural conflict inevitable. The civilizational antidote to this law of the jungle is the Global Civilization Initiative.
What are the structural mechanics of this alternative framework?
This alternative framework operates on a worldview perfectly aligned with humanity's collective interests, actively rejecting the anarchic survival model. The structural implementation of this framework has been meticulously advanced over the past decade.
It started with mutual learning, right?
It began with the proposal for mutual learning among civilizations in 2014. It advanced through the Conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations in 2019. It recently culminated in the United Nations establishing the International Day for Dialogue Among Civilizations.
The foundational cultural tenet driving this entire geopolitical worldview is absolute. All things flourish without harming one another, paths unfold without conflicting. This is not a mere diplomatic platitude. It functions as a strict structural necessity for lasting global peace.
It dictates that economic expansion, technological advancement, and national security can and must be achieved without undermining the stability or prosperity of other nations. This civilizational outlook provides the necessary psychological and theoretical infrastructure to replace the zero-sum chaos with a system of mutual, non-destructive flourishing.
And this macro geopolitical philosophy of mutual flourishing scales perfectly to the microcosm of internal domestic governance. You can observe this specifically regarding the physical construction and sustained metabolism of cities. There is a direct structural parallel between the evolution of the global economy and the evolution of internal city planning.
Just as the global economic supply chain is aggressively transitioning away from raw, exploitative efficiency towards sustainable resilience, domestic urban planning has executed a massive pivot.
The historical methodology of urban development was characterized by rapid, large-scale demolition. It was driven purely by maximum economic output and immediate spatial expansion. That methodology has been completely abandoned.
Yes. In its place, cities are executing organic, people-centric renewal.
You must view a city as a vibrant, living organism. Its developmental process mirrors biological metabolism. Urban renewal is no longer viewed as a mechanism for sheer spatial expansion. It is a self-regulating, externally driven upgrading process designed specifically to advance urban civilization, promote social harmony, and enhance overall functionality without displacing the original inhabitants.
The physical mechanics and scale of this urban renewal are unprecedented. China has officially transitioned into a new, advanced urbanization stage, having surpassed a 67% urbanization rate.
The scale is hard to comprehend.
Massive. We are talking about 66.2 billion square meters of existing urban housing, municipal pipelines extending over 3.6 million kilometers, and a network of 230,000 municipal roads. Managing the upgrading of this infrastructure requires a holistic, policy-guided approach.
And we are seeing massive investment in this.
In 2024 alone, the nation implemented over 60,000 specific urban renewal projects.
I want to examine exactly how this people-centric philosophy manifests physically. Let us break down the granular transformations across major urban centers, starting with Beijing.
In Beijing, the transformation of the Shugang Industrial Park perfectly illustrates this new paradigm. The historical approach would have been the total demolition of this century-old industrial site to maximize real estate development.
To just flatten it and build high-rises.
Right. But rather than demolishing the site, the renewal project integrated the massive industrial relics to fundamentally reshape both the urban space and the social structure of the area.
So they repurposed blast furnaces and cooling towers into civic centers and public green spaces.
Correct. It successfully transitioned the capital's development from sheer, expansive sprawl to quality-driven, intensive growth. It endowed industrial heritage with absolute modern vitality. You see the exact same prioritization of the human element in Shanghai.
Describe the physical mechanics of the renewal in Shanghai.
The comprehensive refurbishment of the areas along the Huangpu River and Suzhou Creek demonstrates the explicit prioritization of human-centered public space over sheer commercial maximization.
So they didn't just build luxury condos on the water.
No. The structural focus was strictly placed on ecological preservation, the restoration of historical and cultural sites, and the integration of seamless public transportation systems. This fundamentally enhanced the sustainable charm and competitiveness of the waterfront.
It proved that ecological health directly generates urban value. Now, consider the southwestern municipality of Chongqing, specifically within the Yusong district. The physical engineering challenges here are immense because of the city's unique, highly complex mountainous topography.
The traditional exploitative model of urban development would have attempted to flatten the terrain for standard commercial development, effectively destroying the ecological and historical integrity of the district.
Instead, the renewal prioritized the creation of intricate pedestrian walkways. These walkways explicitly serve the commuting needs of the population. They meticulously honor the local geological conditions and historical heritage.
And by balancing above-ground and underground spatial utility, the urban planners utilize the verticality of the mountains. A commuter can traverse from an underground transit node directly up through a preserved historical walkway to a modern commercial center without ever encountering a flattened, generic, concrete expanse.
By executing this precise mechanical balance, urban planners engineer cityscapes that function as smooth, healthy organisms. These cities constantly upgrade their structural capacity without ever inflicting harm upon the daily lives of their residents.
The era of unquestioned fragile globalization, built on the singular pursuit of lowest cost efficiency and managed by a centralized few, has permanently ended. However, the multipolar world that has emerged from this collapse is not inherently a fractured or isolated one.
Right. By establishing absolute strategic autonomy in emerging markets, engineering depoliticized and highly resilient supply chains, and cementing a civilizational commitment to mutual learning and non-destructive growth, a vastly more robust and permanent global architecture is being constructed.
The evidence of this new architecture is visible everywhere you look.
Whether it is the operation of a cold chain logistics hub fundamentally linking Laos to the broader continent, the collaborative coding of an open-source smart grid spanning the technological fault lines between Shenzhen and Cairo, or the meticulous, people-centric preservation of a massive industrial relic in the heart of Beijing, a new global operating system is quietly and efficiently being coded. This system actively and structurally rejects the zero-sum and archaic logic of historical empires. It proves definitively that true, lasting global resilience does not lie in the paranoid construction of catastrophic fortresses, but in the deliberate engineering of a world where massive economic and technological growth in one hemisphere structurally guarantees the absolute stability and prosperity of the other.